All right, let's do it. Beloved civil rights leader, theologian, mystic, and educator Howard Thurman wrote, "You can't stand in the midst of the world and struggle for fundamental change unless you are standing in your own space and looking for change within." Welcome to the Thurman Conversations. The Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman believed that it was possible to humanize the other, for Black and brown and white people to find each other, to heal our divisions, and to be humans together in ways that make us all come alive. Tonight, our guest is Reginald Hubbard, a yogi, a teacher, and an activist. Reginald inspires others to gather courage and to seek transformative change. He works to deepen the synthesis of spiritual practice and activism as we seek to address the intractable divisions, racial, political, climate-focused, economic, and the public health crisis in our domestic and international society. In the same way that the civil rights movement was rooted in a deep, abiding commitment to our shared humanity and to building the beloved community, for Reggie, rekindling this type of awareness is both essential and possible. The focus of his yoga teaching is to bring more peace and balance to activists and to guide the wellness community toward being more engaged, concerned citizens. In addition to his yogic activities, most recently, Reggie served as a senior political strategist for a leading progressive campaigning organization, managing their relationships, impact, and communications with Capitol Hill. He is the founder of Active Peace Yoga. Our conversation tonight will no doubt bring up questions for us. So you folks who are joining us, please feel free to type questions in the chat. Our producer will gather them and share them with us at the end so we can answer as many as we can. This is a chance to ask an expert everything you are wondering about where he sits in the world. A special thank you to our mission partners, the Race Task Force for the Episcopal Church in Colorado and St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Lakewood, and to our producer, Michelle Auerbach. My name is Alan Cole, and I will be our host this evening. Before we begin, we need to say that the Thurman Conversations come to you from the unceded territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. We acknowledge those communities, their elders, their stories, past and present, and the emerging future that dismantles the ongoing legacies of our settler colonialism. Reggie, it is a pleasure to have you with us. How are you?
I'm well, Alan. Thank you for the kind introduction. Like, it's funny, and Michelle knows this because she and I've talked about this. Like, I'm now finally getting used to hearing a bio about me, because for the first half of my career, I would say, no, 3/4, I would say I was behind the scenes, right? So I did a lot of advanced work, a lot of the main political work that you saw in the Democratic Party from 2008 through 2018 was mine. But I didn't, I was the producer, right? So like no one really knew. And in advanced world, especially if you're Black, like no one really cares, right? Just to be very frank about it. But over the past year specifically, a tectonic shift has taken place where I went from rebelling of being a teacher to being thrust into various spotlights, because Spirit and several of my senior teachers were just like, like one story that comes to mind specifically is that Rod Stryker, about a year ago in front of 200 people, was basically like, some people need to stop training so much and teach, Reggie, in front of I'm like, yo, he just called my name. Well, I can't curse out my teacher in front of, because I caught some feels. I was just like, that's kind of well, maybe he's right. You know what I mean? You have been practicing yoga for 40 years, and like you have insights that maybe I need to calm this ego and just surrender. And when I surrendered, I mean, it went from like maybe teaching, I only planned on teaching once or twice. And now it has become like this, right? So like branded practice with like, this is inspired by Earth, Wind, and Fire. You know what I mean? So just totally Prince is the patron saint of my teaching practice, all this craziness, right? In one calendar year, I've gone from not teaching at all to like doing stuff with like Parker Palmer and Sharon Salzberg and all this wild stuff. So when Spirit is ready, You better saddle up and ride. That's all I got to say.
So tell us where you sit in this world now. Tell us about your activist work, a little history about yourself.
Yeah.
Talk to us.
So I'm in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. for geographic location. And my family is from Southern Virginia, not Virginia, Virginia.
Virginia.
So south of Northern Virginia, like they still fly the Confederate flag, all those things. But I'm grateful for that as an upbringing because like I'm rooted in the stories of my ancestors, right? So like my grandfather told me stories about my grandfather was light skinned, like super light skinned. He could pass probably, but he would carry a gun to work in case the Klan showed up, right? So he would tell these stories to us. So I never really had the blessing that some people would call it of ignorance. Like I knew exactly where I was in the world. I knew, another story that is key to, it's very similar to my upbringing, is that my grandfather was once told, he served in World War II, and he had like a 4.0 or like a 5.0. He was really, really smart, but he was black, so no one really thought that black people were smart. His one of his supervisors, he was like saying, I want to go to college with this 4.0, and his supervisor told him, hey man, ain't no way a nigga can be that smart. So he told me that story, and I was like, Pop, we'll show him. And I went to Yale. You know what I mean? So like for me, like it's as if the ancestors seeded their inability to succeed in the culture in me, and one of my yoga teachers called me the karmic destroyer, right? So I basically take the dreams of my ancestors and just break those chains and be like, we can't do what? Okay, we talked a little bit about this in pre-production, where just like you say it can't be done, but I just did it. So is that a shortcoming of you? It sure as hell ain't a shortcoming of me. So that's my basis. And in terms of like the activist space, so I made a pretty courageous decision recently to quit, right? So I worked at Move On from 2017 through last week. So fought for the ACA, fought to flip the House, fought to impeach fought all these things. We get the Democratic majority in the trifecta, and I quit. And people were like, why are you quitting? We have the power. I was like, because like I am a teacher, and like I talk about finding balance and like doing activism from a place of wholeness and wellness. I'm exhausted. Like I've been carrying this movement more or less for 4 years, not by myself, because that's ancestral, and I definitely didn't do the work by myself. But I was one of the few, if only, out front Black male leaders in the belly of the beast. So the work was hard in and of itself, but when you put all of those other layers on it, I need to take some naps, right? Like I need to relax. Like I bought my gift to myself for my resignation is I bought I'm trying to cap it at 25, but I bought 20 Tibetan singing bowls thus far. So I have all tones from like high C to like deep D, like all these things. And so what I've been doing is like I've made that part of my meditation practice, right? So like before I go into deep meditation, I'll just like play for like 20 to 30 minutes unstructured, and then I'll sit. So I've transitioned from the front lines of the resistance and the resilience now, since we've won, to diving deeper into contemplative practice, because the quote that you offered earlier really resonated with me, and I think that's one of the secrets to my success, is that there's no way you can look like me and stand in the middle of all of those storms if you aren't grounded in something bigger than yourself. And not only that, but it's not only being grounded in something bigger than yourself, but to have a heart of service that transcends any attachment to ego, right? So not only believing in something bigger than yourself, but having the humility to be a servant, right? So like, for instance, active peace yoga, like I'm one of the few people in the yoga world. It's not a business for me, it's a service. Like my classes are donation based. Like if you don't have any money, I don't care, because like the gift that I've been given isn't mine to charge for. Like if you feel as though you want to offer, cool. If not, that's fine. So for me, the merging of contemplative practice, activism, and well-being and self-care is essential. So now I've been on the front lines for the past 4 years of like Trumpism, you know, quite literally on the front lines. Like 2 years ago, like one of the good things about Big Brother is that it shows some of the pictures that you've done in the past. So 2 years ago, last week, when there was this fake national emergency, so Donald Trump shut down the government to build this dumbass wall. And so I was one of the lead protesters in Lafayette Park across from the White House, quite literally saying, "We're coming for your job, man." You know what I mean? So like I was an enemy of the state. And now I've taken that fire and I'm seeking to remind people that if you don't take care of yourself, then you can't take care of anybody else.
Why the tradition you're in? Why yogic? Why didn't you end up somewhere else? What brought you to that?
Funny story. I don't think I've ever told this story, which is actually good that we're talking about this. I grew up in the Baptist church. And so when I was about, I think 13, 14, I was going to be a preacher. Totally was going to be a preacher, right? Like, and figured that I would be a preacher. Then I went to college and just learned how racist the Southern Baptist Church is and was, and learned how racist the United States was, and went from like being like King Baptist to like Captain Existentialist, right? You know what I mean? So like went from like the vice president of the Baptist Student Union to like reading Jean-Paul Sartre and like Soren Kierkegaard and Martin Heidegger. So I went deep into existential stuff, which I think is perfect in a pandemic because I've been brooding about existence for 35 years, right? So like I've been kind of seasoned and prepared for this. So went through like my own reformation, so to speak, right? So we're like the dogmatism, because I had it, my sophomore year of college was quite traumatic actually. So like my brother's best friend like shot himself. One of my grandfathers passed away, and I was involved in a group that we were seeking to do community service. And you know, how dare like young Black Yaleys want to do better by New Haven? So we just met all this racist stuff, and we almost got suspended for trying to throw a concert for Stop the Violence. And so I was just in a way, and was just in like a really dark place, right? I was like 18, so I was super young. My colleagues in the Baptist Student Union, rather than asking me how I was doing, were worried about my soul. And I was like, you know, can you get that self-righteous bullshit out of here? You know what I mean? Just like, you know, why don't you ask me how I'm doing, man? You know what I mean? Like if I went from like being very engaged to falling off the face of the earth, there's a reason, and you don't care about the reason. You're just caught up on this, like, I'm going to go to hell because I didn't come to your damn meeting. Like, you just cursed. See, that's the whole problem. You got mad at me, right? You got upset at me because I said I'm not coming to your damn meeting, and you don't understand that I'm dying on the inside, man. Like my grandfather died. I'm almost got suspended, and I can't go home for Thanksgiving because I have tremendous like family loss right now. Really, and all you care about is I didn't show up last Thursday. Get the fuck out of my, you know. So basically, was just caught up in this like anger web, right?
Yeah.
So that is how I kind of got out of like the dogmatism. So I still keep a Christian basis, but it got out of the dogmatic, you must do this. I was like, that doesn't serve me. How did I find the yogic path? Well, about 7 years ago, actually, I was in line to be either the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Arnie Duncan or the Deputy Assistant International Secretary for International Education, like some crazy long ass title in Washington, D.C. Pushed in all my chips to get in the presidential personnel process, Alan, made it to the top 2 for both jobs and got neither one. Oh my God. You want to talk about heartbreaking. I like cried for a month, like was totally just like, oh, right. And was angry. So all the things, right? So I was like, how in the world in Obama's administration can an Ivy League educated trilingual Black man who has a European master's degree not get a motherfucking job? Like really? Like, so I basically was just all the way in like the dark night of the soul. And but luckily, the year prior, I had undertaken a wellness journey, right? So on April 1st, 2013, I weighed about 330 pounds and just was like, you know, and I was 38 at the time. I was like, yo, okay, you got sugar on one side of your family, so that's diabetes for anyone who's not Southern. So like, you got sugar on one side of your family, you got cancer and heart disease on the other side of your family, and you walking around like not sleeping, thinking that you're invincible. Like, child, please, like you need to get your life right. So April 1st for me is a sacred day. I call it my rebirth day. So every April 1st, I celebrate because it's the day that I started viewing my wellness as sacrosanct. And so so that was April 1st, 2013. So in 2014, like I noticed myself getting into that negative spiral, like you're the worst, like why? And so I was like, okay, so I have my two. So the blessing of like contemplative practice is that spiral, which used to take 2 years, at that point was 2 weeks of the dark night of the soul, not like, I had a really rough spell after college when my folks divorced, and I was like in my room, like listening to Billie Holiday, drinking bourbon for breakfast, kind of thing, right? So like that was like for like 8 months. So it went from 8 months to 2 weeks over like just the refining of through contemplative practice. So when I didn't get either of those jobs, I had my 2 weeks of just like everything sucks, woe is me, and then I snapped out of it, and I was like, you know what? I am going to only do anything. So I'm going to go and just do whatever. I'm only going to do things that lower my blood pressure, make me smile, and are creative. Like that was my criteria for life. So if anyone would ask me to do something, I'm like, blood pressure, check, creative, check, blah, blah, blah. So someone's like, you should come to yoga with me. And I'm like, So went down the checklist. And what I did not know is that one class I went to in November 2014 would lay the predicate for just what has become just something that I still can't fathom. So I started practicing asana out of curiosity, right? It's like, oh, this is cool, right? It's creative and artsy and blah, 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 and spiritually nourishing and those sorts of things. Then because of that experience that I had with the Obama administration, like when you go all in for 2 jobs in the administration and don't get it, you got to go. That's like asking someone to marry you and they say no. Like, shit, I got to leave town. Like, I can't be with you no more. Like, I got to go. Like, I profess my love to you and you said, so what? Shit, I got to go. So like I left Washington and moved to Denver, Colorado. And for a dream job for a now defunct nonprofit that did international education, because education is near and dear to my heart. On day 6 of that job, it went from dream job to nightmare. Like just was in a staff meeting and was getting hazed and like, why did we hire you? I'm like, what happened? Oh my God, you know what I mean? So I sensed like that anger bubble coming up again. And I was like, oh man, like I'm about ready to curse everyone out. Like, how do I not curse them out? Well, maybe this yoga thing will keep me from cursing out my boss. Right. So I started going to sunrise and sunset, right? Just this sunrise and sunset asana. And started also doing philosophy major, right? So like I'd read some of the philosophical sentence before, but never really got into the physical practice. So what I did not know was happening was that it was like tempering my spirit. Like it was like opening me up to different aspects of like not only energy, but just awareness. So 10 months thence, when they fired me via text message, hothead Reggie, who almost cursed out his boss for like saying, why did we hire you? Was just like, they're like, Reggie, we should have an exit interview. And I'm like, y'all know damn well that we don't need no exit interview. I was like, but I do want to thank you. And they're like, in typical passive aggressive, like white lady, for what? I'm like, I want to thank you for how poorly you treated me because you gave me the wisdom to deal with grace with adversity. And I bowed. And then I called my mom and was just like, this yoga shit, oh my God, like they just fired me via text message and I thanked them. This thing is crazy. So that basically showed me that there's a different alchemy here that I need to dive into. So then I joined the Bernie Sanders campaign. And when I joined the campaign, I essentially told them, look, I will do whatever you want me to do, but I'm a yogi. Like, so this is my lifestyle. This is my practice. It ain't some stuff I do on Tuesday at 6. Like, it's something that I do every day. And if this campaign gets in the way of my personal practice, I'm quitting. And they're like, ha ha ha. I was like, I'm very, very, very serious. Right. So again, and the sutras talk about this and other yogic texts talk about this, is that when you make the commitment and you do it as sadhana, when you do it as discipline, it just makes tremendous changes in your life. And so like I didn't know it at first, but once I understood the alchemy, I mean, Alan, it's been like, I mean, there's no way I'm going back now, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And you bring a lot of stuff together in your work, in your teaching, in your spiritual practice. Can you draw some connections to us from your practice as a Buddhist and liberation theology? What is Buddhist liberation theology?
so I view it in the context that as a practitioner, my job is to alleviate suffering in the world and to be a conduit of either conversation or direct action or opportunities for people to find their place in those hierarchies to bring liberation for people, right? And for me, it begins with self, you know. So the book that I'm reading, it's funny because when Michelle and I were talking, I just mentioned, I was like, yeah, so I wrote this thing on Howard Thurman. She's like, Howard Thurman? I'm like, yeah. So I'm reading this book, The Inward Journey, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
all his writings,
Yeah.
because like that's the synthesis I'm seeking to make now, right? The only reason I was a successful activist is because I had, you know, in Buddhist world, they call it wise action, you know. So like, you know, so I basically have structured practice to allow me to have the clarity to use wise action to effectuate like large change, right? So I'm in this training program with Roshi Joan Halifax and the Upaya Zen Center, so socially engaged Buddhism, where basically it is about, so how, you know, Buddhism in the West is, and for many people it's a supper club, you know. So I've been studying the Dharma for 30 years. So what? Like what are you doing with it? Right? You know, like this isn't about, oh, I've been studying the Dharma and this tradition for 30 years. And yeah, that's great. But like people are suffering. Like George Floyd got murdered by the police, right? And if you have been studying the Dharma for 30 years, then you know that it's about alleviating suffering. So like right now, it seems like you're only not only perpetuating suffering through your complacency, but what are you doing for other people? Because like if you look at it from a larger perspective, there is no I, it's all we. So whatever I do in service to the collective has a direct positive benefit for me as well.
So you challenge the notion of what we all think about as Buddhists. You get kind of fired up at people. So I mean, most of us think that, you know, Buddhists are sitting around doing this, and it inspires you. It actually makes you front and center. So why is a practice that makes you still? Why does that give you energy to go out and be in front?
Well, I think it, you know, the quote that you articulated at the beginning is like one of the calling cards for my practice, right? So what use is it having inner peace if you don't do anything with it? So the name of my yoga teaching practice is called Active Peace for that reason. So if I've got all this peace and I just sit on a cushion, it'd be different if I'm in a monastery, that's cool, but you're in the world. Like, what are you going to do with that peace in the world? Right? It's not enough to just be like, oh, I'm peaceful and the sun is shining. So what? Like how are you going to help people? Right? So it's not to me, it's insufficient. And I would even say it's malpractice, to be somewhat controversial, for you to keep all this peace to yourself and not do anything with it, right? You know, because like what's the point? You know, for me, and it may be a hybrid of like yogic and Buddhist and Christian, and for me, is that I believe that I'm supposed to serve from the abundance of my practice, right? So like if I have, and you know, in many Buddhist traditions, they say, may the merits of our practice be of use to those other than ourselves, right? So how is the merit of your practice serving someone else if you just sit on it? I don't understand that, you know. And maybe it's because I come from an activist bent. Maybe it's because I'm a Black man in the United States in a system that seeks to destroy and marginalize me at best, right? So for me, I can't be complacent, nor can I be quiet when, and quite candidly, in the United States, they used to hang us by our necks so we wouldn't talk, right? You know, there's a reason that people were lynched. Is to take your voice away, to crush your voice box. Like that's intentional. Like lynching was done for people to shut up. You know, they could have done, there are other ways to like humiliate someone than to like hang them from a tree, and crush their voice box, right? So for me, as a descendant, as a karmic destroyer of Black men who were hung from trees, you ain't gonna get me to be quiet about nothing. And like this fire that I bring is because it's time for some action, right? It's time, you know, like one of my other yoga teachers calls me the karma yogi. It's time for action.
Mm.
It's not time, like, this isn't the epoch where we sit on the cushion and hope everything's okay. We take what we have from the cushion and then be of service to other people. Because if you don't serve others from your abundance in my world, from my view, that's malpractice. I've said that before, but I truly believe that.
Tell me, for folks who want to be grounded
Right.
and want to work, the people who have a practice, but you don't see their work in the world, which fires you up. What would you say to them? What would you say to do? Where would you have them engage?
So one instance I use often is so one of the blessings of the coronavirus era is fora like this, right? So I recently was the only person of color in a Sangha devoted to mindful conversations about race. And the reason that I chose to do that is because like I had to check myself. And so, and I do this as a teacher. I'm just like, look, all the stuff I'm asking you to do, I'm doing the same damn thing. You know what I mean? So like me, Black dude in a group that the only other Black thing was the rim around the Zoom screen, right? So like, why would I choose to do that? Because for me, I had avidya, ignorance, towards the intentions of white folks, right? So there is a commonly held notion, white people don't care about race. I didn't believe that. And I had to, I caught myself saying that. And I was just like, okay, man, like you're full of shit right now. Like you got to check yourself. So how do you check yourself? You check yourself by going into a space and being of service to the space, right? And so one of the opportunities that happened, and so we had our last meeting on Tuesday, and everyone thanked me for showing up. And I didn't do it for the thanks. I did it to actually like to teach myself. But they thanked me for showing up and offering so vulnerably from my lived experience, because everyone's read all the Ibrahim Kendi books, like everyone's read all the books. We need to have tough conversations now, like, you know, racial stuff and or the intractable stuff that we talked about in the bio. That doesn't happen through analysis. Analysis is a mechanism of paralysis, right? Like we need to have opportunities to have these tough conversations from a loving, vulnerable space, and then create opportunities for new connection from that fertile soil that comes from vulnerability, right? Like that's where it comes from. It doesn't come from, oh, I'm just going to read this book and just have the same thoughts. Like perpetuating the same thoughts leads to the same problems, right? You know what I mean? It doesn't lead to solutions. You need to have transformative, cross-cultural, intersectional thinking in order to meet the moment.
Tell me what it looks like. And you've probably taught a lot of people by now. And I'm wondering if you can recall for us some folks that have come to you as a teacher,
yeah,
and what their life looks like now, having actually opened and listened to you and practiced with you. What does that look like?
It's funny because like Active Peace turned 1 last week. So like I had for those people who don't believe in God, goddess, or whatever, like don't talk to me, because like I ain't got no time for that. So April 1st was my reborn day. April 2nd was not only the first anniversary of Active Peace, it was my last day at Move On. And like I did this Instagram live with Yoga with Adrienne, so that was seen by a zillion people. And she's helped me celebrate so all of these like crazy confluences happened, and it was Good Friday, and it was Passover, like it was all these like things were happening at the same time.
Right.
If that's not I mean, come on, man. Like, you know, ain't no accidents, right? In spiritual practice, like all that synchronicity is not by accident. So I say that to say this: we had this amazing kind of retrospective practice on Friday night, where there are some people who have been with me for a solid year, and Active Peace community is actually kind of small, and I prefer it that way to some extent, because like I want serious folks, right? You know what I mean? I want, this is about discipline. Like yoga for me is a discipline. And so like the way I teach is kind of like a dojo, right? So like we have themes for the week, like we have questions, like it's not like asana is part of what we do, but it's also self-study, right? So like to get on my website, like it's optional, but if you do the homework, you'll be blessed by it, right? Like, so I'll have like themed questions and those sorts of things. And one of the most humbling testimonies that I received is that someone told me that over the course of the year, as they read their journal, they saw the darkness that was enshrouding them at the beginning of the pandemic lighten week by week by week, to the point now where their friends are just like, what happened to you, yo? You know what I mean? Just like, you're all happy and like optimistic. And, you know, for the first X years of their life, that wasn't their predicament. But because I know this from lived experience, like discipline practice avails much. Iyengar says as much, right? So like discipline practice over time avails much. And so those, or last night in our meditative practice, someone was just like, um, I basically used to have a procrastination problem because I had all this anxiety about why I didn't do this, why I didn't do that. And I think it's because of these damn, her words, these damn yoga and Zoom and meditation classes that I'm just in a different place where I'm just like, okay, there's nothing really to be anxious about here, la, la, la. So the gentle reconditioning through assiduous practice has allowed people to come into norms of peace and well-being, as opposed to just like reactionary states of anxiety. And that comes through practicing day by day. So that's very humbling, but that's also the intent. That's the reason why, like when I got out of the belly of the whale and went to Nineveh, right? So like when I went to the city, I was basically doing what I was supposed to do the entire time, right? So as such, I'm not totally surprised that people are saying this to me. I'm just surprised it took me so long to listen.
Hey man, what does it feel like to be somebody who affects change like that? Not just on a big activism level, but affects change like the kind of change that Howard Thurman talks about,
Right,
heart change,
right.
mind change, body change. How does that feel to be that guy, man?
Very humbling, especially considering that I'm about to dive into deep study of Mr. Thurman, right? Like, so like, I believe to the core of my being that that same discipline, that same rigor that was the basis of the civil rights struggle, if we as a collective can find that measure of discipline, that measure of compassion, that measure of connection, I truly believe that these problems that are impossible will be easier. But it doesn't happen, and it's another reason, now that we're talking about it, like I just had a bit aha moment.
Mhm.
Another reason why I'm leaving, I left Capitol Hill, like the activist piece, is that like it ain't about lobbying legislation for me right now. Did that.
Right,
I
right, right.
that doesn't The change that is required in this moment doesn't have anything to do with HR 202.
Mm.
It
Man, I
doesn't.
do. I want to say something. What you said about that continued practice day after day.
Hmm.
My Tai Chi instructor told us the other day, just like stacking sheets of paper, And I was wondering what you would tell somebody who was just starting out, who wanted to find what you have found and are finding in your practice. What would you say to them?
Breath by breath, moment by moment,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like there's no if you had told if someone had told me 7 years ago when I took that first class, hung over, mind you, right? So I took my first class, hung over, like stupid, right? Just whatever. 7 years from now, you're gonna be like a up and coming teacher, like completely shaking things up. I would have been like, look, man, I'm just really trying to like deal with this like sadness that I didn't get this job, right?
Mhm.
So to some extent you can't articulate the change that happens. You just have to, for me, I just have to share stories, and I have to share stories. My job is essentially sharing stories and holding space.
Right. All
and
right. I
and
want to talk about music with you.
all right, cool. But one
So
quick one quick thing I'll say is that
okay, go ahead.
when you share stories and hold space, it allows grace the room to breathe, right?
Uh,
So my job, I don't change anything. I basically hold space for grace to do its work. So I share my stories from a vulnerable place and then hold the space. And in that space, in that vulnerability, that's when the alchemy of change takes place.
Hmm. Yeah, that's going to end up in a sermon, man. Sorry. I'll quote you though. Hey, talk to us about music and your practice and how it informs your practice, and um, go off, man.
Yeah. So the patron saint of active peace yoga is Prince Rogers Nelson, right? So
Mm.
it's funny. So actually, maybe I can show. I don't know. So active peace has two logos. So one, I don't have it, but one is a purple lotus with like black prayer hands. So iridescent purple, that's Prince,
Mhm.
like that's crown chakra, like that's like Sri, it's beautiful, like all those other things. The other lotus is this one. So it's a fire lotus with black
Uh,
prayer hands. That's Jimi Hendrix,
oh,
right? So when Jimmy was in Monterey and he set the thing on fire and was just like, "What you got, baby?" You know what I mean? So like when he's going like this, that's my activist place. You know what I mean? So like my teaching practice is the merging of like divine wisdom and activist practice at in the same place. So those totems for me are Prince Rogers Nelson and Jimi Hendrix, right? So two powerful, artsy, ahead of their time Black dudes, right? So maybe maybe I can relate, right? So those two are the foundations of the logos and of the practice. From that, all I try and do as a teacher is give you the space for the beauty that is you to be made manifest, right? So whatever song you're meant to sing, I'm just trying to get you to warm up your throat to sing in your register. You know what I mean? That's all I'm really trying to do. So that's one aspect of it. So from the more esoteric level, from the practical level, I use music quite regularly, like 3 or 4 times a year. I don't do it often because, like, to me, I teach Prince asana classes, and so to me, it's like a sacrament, right? You know, people are like, why don't you do this all the time? I was like, because sacred is meant to be revered, yo. You know what I mean? Like, I don't do this every week. It's like it's not for that. It's for moments in time where we need transformative shakti and to shake things up, and or to commemorate whether it be Prince's life. The last one I taught was the Sunday before inauguration, right? To remind folks that some change is coming and we're gonna wear all the costumes and listen to all the Prince music and just like shake it and get real, right? So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that, and sound, as we all know, regardless of our spiritual affiliation, sound is transcendent. And there are aspects of sound that allow for healing that words can't touch, right?
mhm.
That logic can't touch. So a song or I've shared this in pre-production. I bought way too many singing bowls. I mean, I say way too many because I've only got two hands, but like to explore sound, right? So one of the things that I've learned over the course of all of my practices, but especially as I've transitioned in my hatha practice and my hatha study, is that there is a range and a spectrum of energy that we may not, our senses can't notice, but impacts us, right? So we may not feel ultraviolet rays, but you know, it impacts. So there are levels of sound radiation or light radiation that impact us that I found that my sound practice essentially shakes off like the sound noise and just allows pure sound to replace that noise, and in so doing offers like not only therapy but just cleansing, so you can be more in tune with your vibe. So that's another aspect of not only, I wouldn't say music per se, but sacred sound. And even, you know, the morning class that I taught on Active Peace's birthday, we had like Otis Redding, uh Daydreaming by Aretha Franklin, Nina Simone, you know what I mean? So we get down. Yeah, so like I've been known to have everything from Prince to Led Zeppelin to like Hendrix to Lenny Kravitz to like all these things, as a creative expression of physicality and somatic awareness, right? You know, because the other aspect of the yoga world that I'm at war with, quite candidly, is the milk toast commoditization of a sacred practice, right? So everyone doing the same damn Surya Namaskar, too many down dogs that are bad for your shoulders, and don't focus on the goal. The goal of the body is to move, right? So music helps the body move, and music helps the body move in ways that you don't necessarily think about. So one anecdote I'll share is that I often, the song Erotic City by Prince, I often do hip work to that, because when that bass line gets in and George Clinton starts to, oh, like, so when that thing starts to happen, like you can't help but sway, right? And in that swaying, what I as a teacher know what I'm doing, I'm helping you find relief in your hips. You don't know that, I know that. So to some extent, without getting too creepy is not the word, but all teachers have like a method to their madness. So I use the mechanism of music to allow for energetic shifting in ways that I know only music can offer.
So what's on your playlist right now, man? What's moving you?
There's a song called Find Balance in Life. The guy's name is Reginald. I don't remember his last name because there ain't that many Reggies out there. So right, like Reginald something, but Find Balance in Life. And I happen to have Spotify open right now. The last class I taught that had music was a class I teach on Sundays called Soul Food Sunday. And it had, because it was actually an anniversary of the practice, right? So I used, and it's on Sunday, and it was Easter Sunday. So I basically I had to take folks to church. Are you kidding me? Right. And I teach in a church. So it's Easter Sunday. So anyway, it had Lord Help Me by Donny Hathaway, which was essentially my prayer when I started teaching. And if you don't know the song, it's a beautiful song where Donny Hathaway is like, essentially, help me to inspire those that need inspiration. May my life be a sign of the coming generation. And then it's like all these harmonics and all these other things. So for me, that was when I started Active Peace a year ago, I was like, I don't know what, help. Lord help me, Lord help me. And then the second song on that was a Sack Full of Dreams. So once I petitioned God, the ancestors, and everyone for help, it's time for me to talk about my dreams. So Sack Full of Dreams by Donny Hathaway, where he essentially talks about his dreams for peace, love, and happiness in the world. You petition for support, you put your sack full of dreams out there. The next song was This Little Light of Mine by the Staple Singers, right? So like once you petition, and then you talk about your dreams, you start like, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. And it's kind of like rockabilly, like this version is like old school, like rock meets gospel. It's amazing. Then it's Easter Sunday, so we had to have I've Been Redeemed, right? So it's like a slide guitar New Orleans version of I've Been Redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, like so that. And so continuing with the theme, This Little Light of Mine, then you've been redeemed by your authentic expression, right? And so lastly, when you've been redeemed by your authentic expression, you're Feeling Good by Nina Simone, right? And it's an homage to springtime. So the last class I taught with music had those 5 songs.
That's awesome, man.
It was fun.
So we got a question. I want to move into some questions now. We've got I don't know, about 20 minutes left or so.
Cool.
So one of our listeners asks, I'm haunted by what I call the Howard Thurman question. In short words, why can't Christianity eradicate racism?
Because it's bigger than Christianity. All right, quite honestly, it's not the place of a religious order to eliminate racism. It is to me, it is heart work done in the individual. The religious order or the sect or whatever can create the conditions for that heart work to take place, but that's an individual pursuit, right? And the only thing that we can do, either as Christians or yogis or all of that, I consider myself all 3, is that similar to what I just articulated, like this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. You know what I mean? So like, hopefully through my lived experience of self-actualization, you can either seek or ask questions about what I did. And then I'll share my story with you, but I can't do your work for you. Like the church can't do the work for the people. The people got to do their work, right? So if people don't pray, and or offer, another thing that's worth mentioning is that because Active Peace Yoga is a service, like the top 20% of whatever I make off donations goes to charity, right? Because that's important to me. Like to get to essentially, you know, here I go with my Baptist upbringing, but to give the first fruits of your service in service. So
Yeah.
if people don't have that tithing mentality, not just in terms of money, but if you don't tithe your time or you don't tithe your energy in pursuit of that inner work, like, you know, like the name of this book is called The Inner Journey. Like racism is a heart problem. It's not a liturgical problem, right? Like it's a heart problem. And it involves the radical vulnerability that takes place with consistent practice, whether that be prayer, Bible study, or meditation or whatever. You need a consistent discipline practice to be vulnerable and humble, to be of service. And if Christianity is the dogmatic type that we've been talking about, that's not the play, you know, there's no place in dogma for the type of heart work that needs to take place in order for us to transcend that issue.
And your description of what generosity looks like is probably the best thing I've ever heard, bro. That's it, man. I tell you, I'm definitely going to steal that.
Freely given, you know, wisdom. You know, wisdom is not mine, right? It's just something that comes through me. So, like, if it inspired you, it's from them.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So,
So we have another question.
yeah.
One of our listeners says, you're going to do, so you say you're going to do some work on Howard Thurman. What are you thinking about? What's the nature of that?
So I have applied to this thing at the University of San Diego called the Activist in Residence for their School of Peace Studies. And fingers crossed, if it comes to manifest, is that I'm going to do not only research, but active practice of merging spiritual practice and activist practice, and talk about it in the context of the intractable problems that we have, right? So how do we solve climate change? It's not going to be by forcing votes through reconciliation in the Senate. It's through convincing people that being engaged socially is part of your moral contract, and being engaged in your well-being is part of your spiritual contract. And so when your moral contract and your spiritual contract are merged, you can't help but serve in the interest of other people. So from that foundation, I'm hopeful, quite candidly, to start a revolution of destruction of norms in both the activists and the spiritual community. So activists kill, you know, and that's what I try and do through my teaching practice, right? So activists, great hearts, burn themselves out. Spiritual people have all the quote unquote answers, but sit on their ass. You know what I mean? So like, can the activist folks get a little bit more spiritual temperament and not burn themselves out? And can we put a fire under the people's behinds that are still on these cushions and not in these streets?
Yeah, man. We got another question, but this question this listener has for us, I got to say before I ask you this, you come together, your experience comes together in you. All your experiences seem to shape everything that comes out of your mouth, man. I mean, you talk about where you grew up and your grandfather and, you know, Christianity, Baptists and Buddhism and activism. And man, we hear all that. So the question is, how do the yogic philosophy, Buddhist practice, and Christianity live in you together?
Very carefully. No, I'm kidding. No, to me, honestly, and actually, I gave a Dharma talk recently where I offered this, and I'll offer the same thing. So I was raised Christian. Yoga made me a better Christian. Right? So yogic discipline, service to community, honoring the body as a temple, made me a better Christian, a better vessel of service based on my spiritual upbringing. Buddhism has made me a better yogi.
Wow.
Right? So the mindfulness practice, and just to be honest, like I used to dig on mindfulness. I was just like, this is so stupid. Like just total East Coast, like just no compassion, like straight talking shit, like just totally, you know, just like, mindfulness. I'm just gonna sit here and ponder. Like I would totally just rain on mindfulness. And now I'm in a damn mindfulness training. So here's what I say to everyone: just be careful what you ridicule, because you will be front and center. Right? Humility avails itself in the most strange ways. So like, but the mindfulness aspect, so I'm at a level of yogic practice that is internal now.
Mhm.
Right? So like I have to find refinement internally, and that only happens through deep breath, mindfulness, these bowls that I have. So, just to be kind of a geek about sound, you hit a bowl,
Mm.
you think you hear one thing, then 10 seconds later, it's something else, but it's the same vessel, right?
Mm.
So it is teaching me discernment. It is
Mhm.
teaching me deep listening, and it's teaching me to be just more sharp with my attention, right? That's mindfulness practice, right?
Mhm.
So that level of specificity and mindfulness is making, so the last thing I'll share specifically is that I just, in total Reggie fashion, like I quit my job and so have this active peace celebration that I'm directly back in the book. So Rod Stryker, I told you, is one of my teachers. The deadline for Kundalini certification was yesterday, right? So like I had to turn in all this stuff for this training I took in November yesterday. And so I'm in these texts and looking at these lectures and doing all this stuff because it's a delight to be a student again. And at the higher levels of yogic practice, it's all about refining your energy. It's all about having the awareness of what you put out in the world and refining it to a point so you can be a little bit more surgical, so you can be a little bit more attuned, so you can be, one of my teachers, Amy Apollotti, she just changed the name of her school from 90 Monkeys to Vesselify. So at all levels of spiritual practice, to some extent, you're a vessel of divine will and divine creation. So to be a better vessel, you've got to change your attunement, right? You've got to change your refinement. So for me, the answer is like I was born and raised Christian in the Baptist church. My yoga practice made me a better Christian. My Buddhist practice makes me a better yogi.
Mm.
All of those things together make me a better servant of humanity.
Man, I just got to tell you, I'm writing stuff down that you're saying. I got another question. So you mentioned a little while ago, you mentioned storytelling
Yeah.
and holding space. Can you tell us more about those two things, how they come together in you?
Um, True change happens through deep personal connection. The quickest way to deep personal connection is to tell a good story, right? Stories are powerful. Stories are magic.
Yeah.
And stories are a easy way to humanize deep esoteric concepts, right? So like one of the things that I've been able to do is I have a gift, I've been told, of like distilling really abstract stuff through a story,
Hmm.
right? So rather than me being overly academic and being like, well, the first implementation of Kundalini Shakti is, well, like that's not, no one cares about that. Whereas if I say, you know, as I deepen my meditation practice, then I'm able to be a better certain, like telling a story about deep theory helps people understand deep theory in ways that like the languaging that I had to learn to access these materials is not common for most people. Nor should they be. Like I would not honestly wish anyone reading Being in Time by Martin Heidegger ever, right? Like it's a great book, but I, I wish I had the picture, I would show it to you. Like one of the best pictures of me in college is me laid out on the floor with the book on my forehead and my eyes are crossed, right? So I have a bald head, like I'm laid out on the floor, and it's just Being in Time, like pressed on my forehead, and my eyes are crossed. Like, so I, as a 19-year-old, had to suffer through like the pangs of Dasein and all these other things in order to be able to articulate just the means of like cognition, right? Yikes, right? So the ability to tell a good story not only connects you with other people, in many ways, a lot of the traditions I study were oral,
Mhm.
right? So it's tapping into the wisdom of the tradition. Like, most yoga teachers they recite the same sequences, but they don't tell stories, right?
Mhm.
Like the old yogis were storytellers. Like it's an oral tradition. So like in keeping with the energetics of the practice, especially the hatha tradition, which I study most seriously, it is a tradition of stories and the mythology. Are you kidding me? Like some of these myths, like the yogic myths, oh my goodness, like Shiva did what? You know what I mean? Just like or Hanuman, like so all these stories. Um, that's kind of what got me hooked too. I was like, oh man, so and so was a monkey and then did what? You know what I mean? So, like, he ripped open his heart to do what? What? Right? And then he right. So like so that level of connection,
Mhm.
it makes people laugh, you cry, and in that connection, transformation takes place.
Yeah. Hey man, I want to just real briefly, because we're getting close to time. I want
Mm.
to know what voices in our world right now do you think are powerful? Who's a prophetic voice for you?
Um, I've been listening a lot. I mean, Ayanna Presley is
Mm,
my homegirl,
mhm.
right? Like, she's one of my sisters. Like, in fact, when I told her I resigned, she was just like, "And who gave you permission to do this?" Right? Essentially. So, like, Ayanna Presley is the perfect combination of activism, ancestral grounding, and speaking truth to power,
Mhm.
right? So, like, Ayanna Presley um, is probably my top one with respect to like the combination. And in fact, like, I told her and her staff, I was a part of the reason I felt comfortable resigning is like y'all called me healer. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, because their office was the first one that I taught at all. Like the week after the impeachment vote was called or the inquiry was called. And so Ayana's like, Reggie, you have this gift of like, just people just availing themselves to you and you just tell great stories and people feel healed by you. So you're a healer. So I was like, so when I resigned, I told her chief of staff, I was like, you remember when we were in Ayana's office and she called me healer? So this is your fault. You know what I mean? Like, it's your fault that I'm quitting, right? You know what I mean? If she didn't call me healer, I wouldn't have thought about it. And then once I thought about it, I was like, well, maybe I am. And now that I know that I am, it's time to get to work. Right.
Tell us where we can find you.
So for those on the interwebs, I'm at www.activepeaceyoga.com. Instagram for those on that level of interwebs, O Reggie Global, OREGGIEGLOBAL, and Active Peace Yoga on Instagram. I don't do Twitter because I don't care.
Right.
And
Right.
anything that Donald Trump like used, I'm kind of not whatever. Like I'm like cool, whatever. But what I will say about my social media presence is that like I use it as a tool for healing and inspiration. Like
Mhm.
you will never see, oh man, Reggie just checked in at such and such restaurant. There's no shade on that if that's what you do. But
Mhm.
for me, I feel it is a key opportunity to give people bits of healing and wisdom to carry forth in their life. Because whether we like it or not, a lot of people live like this. So when you see this space, I want you to know, like, yo, what does this guy got to say? Maybe he'll say something that just inspires me today. So that is how I use the medium, and I feel it as a tool for just tremendous healing, especially now. Because in conclusion, and I think it's a perfect way for me to end is that contemplative practice for me has saved my life, and it has given me the courage to dial things back when everyone's rushing, right? So in the impeachment trial, when people were like, my colleagues almost called Nancy Pelosi a coward. I was like, so if you call Nancy Pelosi a coward, I can't get into the office and speak to them. So can we slow this down? And so because of my ability to be able to gear down and stay focused,
Mhm.
it has allowed amazing things to happen and for me to be a conduit through those things. So in conclusion, y'all, we're coming out of a tremendous season of loss and social dislocation and economic dislocation and extreme pain. There's no need to rush into the next thing,
Mhm.
right? take a breath,
Yeah. Gotcha.
1 foot in front of the other, and use the gifts of the season that we just went through to be the fertilizer in the season of spring. Like the energy of spring is regenerative anyway. So use the wisdom that we just got to plant seeds to bloom in their time. You can't, like, I can go outside and scream at this tree, where are your leaves? The tree is just gonna laugh at me. But if I wait and wait, it will bloom and be as beautiful and be even more beautiful because it was done in its time and it wasn't rushed.
Reggie, man, whatever beautiful, loving, humble, powerful spirit there is has flowed through you tonight. Thank you for being with us, man. I really appreciate it. Everybody, please check your chat for the links that we've posted posted there. Stay tuned. Thurman Conversations will be back in about 2 weeks on April 22nd, when we will have Nina Ichikawa as our conversation partner. Nina is an executive director for the Berkeley Institute. She previously served in the office of U.S. Senator Daniel K. Inouye and with the U.S. Department of Agricultural's Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food initiative. She was founding food and agricultural editor for Hyphen magazine, and her writings on our changing food system are widely published. Nina received a BA in interdisciplinary studies, food policy from UC Berkeley, and an MA in international relations food policy from Meiji Gakuin University in Tokyo. She volunteers with the California Farmer Justice Collaboration. We're going to talk about the education of culture, food, and activism, and her travels, and another fabulous conversation. The Thurman Conversations, our series, is sponsored by the Race Task Force of the Episcopal Church in Colorado and St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Lakewood, and produced by the awesome Michelle Auerbach, as always. If you like what you're hearing here, don't tell us, tell your friends. Stay safe, love your neighbor, wear a mask, get vaccinated, and wherever you go, go in peace. Have a blessed evening. Good night.
Thank you very much. Love and
Thank
grace
you,
to all.
Reggie.
Definitely look in the chat, Reggie, because there were some sweet messages to you. One of them guessing which Enneagram number you were. So
Nice. Nice.
I don't think she was wrong either.
That's
Maybe
funny.
a little bit. Maybe.
Hey man, you were inspiring to me. I appreciate the time and
Yeah,
your
absolutely.
honesty and bringing yourself to us, man. You know that's we want to know about people here, and you shared yourself with us. So thank you.
Yeah, my honor. And, you know, blessings to your community as you deal with everything that's the aftermath of everything that went down a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Most people forget about that. I don't, right? So like blessings to y'all.
Thank you.
And thank you for your questions and just the way that you facilitated, right? So like I'm on a lot of these things and a lot of people can't carry a conversation, just to be explicit, but like, so gratitude to you as well.
Man, you made it easy. You really did. So God bless you, man. Take care.
Yep.
Okay.
Blessings, love and grace.
You too. You too.
Bye.
Bye.